by political journalist Zoe Grunwald and reporter at The Spectator, Cindy Yu. So very good morning to both of you. Lovely to see you both. And it feels like there are just a couple of stories dominating the front pages, and they concern Ukraine or domestically what's going on with the nation's finances. But let's kick off with the first of those, because The Guardian has what's going on in Ukraine on their front page. Cindy, the headline there, the message from the Prime Minister today, who's holding a virtual meeting with this so-called Coalition of the Willing. What exactly is his message, do you think?
Basically, the Prime Minister wants to find out what are the metrics for success for this truce that the US and Ukraine have brokered in Saudi Arabia this week, because Putin has now come back with a counteroffer, with a set of conditions to say, I will only accept a truce like this if this is complete, if that is complete, and these are things such as recognising Crimea as part of Russian territory, or that Ukraine must stay neutral in the long run. So all of these things, the Ukrainians fear rather, that is Putin playing games or playing for time. And actually, in the meantime, he is still making encroachments into Ukraine. So Keir Starmer is bringing together these European allies of Ukraine to say, well, what do we actually want out of this process? And how much can we influence from the outside?
Well, yes, and how much influence do you think someone like Keir Starmer, but also these nations, more than 20 of them, what kind of pressure can they put? Because at the moment it feels like it's a discussion that's been going on exclusively between President Putin, President Trump and President Zelensky.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, obviously, Putin has praised Donald Trump considerably in this process. He said he was doing everything to improve relations between Moscow and Washington. He said, and Trump himself has said that they've had very good and productive discussions between him and Putin. Keir Starmer's influence, I would say, is far less than that of Trump's. But when you combine it with other European Commission, other European nations, Ukraine, Australia, New Zealand, you do get a much stronger raft of nations who will be able to put pressure on Russia, especially if there are conversations about what they can do economically to make sure that Putin abides by any terms of a ceasefire deal. And we know that there is going to be lots of discussion today, not only about what Ukraine wants in a ceasefire, but what these nations can do together to ensure that Putin would not re-invade.
Well, yes, and let's take in the Daily Telegraph, which has a very similar headline there. Stop your games, Starmer tells Putin, is their headline. And this is being called the Coalition of the Willing because they're the countries who have expressed support for a kind of peacekeeping plan inside Ukraine should a ceasefire be agreed. We don't know how many would actually send any kind of troops or anything, but there's support of some kind has been pledged. However, if you've got President Putin laying down the red lines, one of which is no troops from a NATO country can be inside Ukraine, it does beg the question of what role they might play in the future.
Absolutely, and also it begs the question of what does a security guarantee look like? What does Ukraine ideally want? Is there something similar to an Article 5 for NATO, such that if Ukraine gets invaded again, that you have NATO forces coming in to support? Because that feels like a bit of a red flag for Russia as well, to kind of create future advantages. I think also the other question here is whether or not Keir Starmer has kind of overplayed in terms of pledging these things, because what we hear actually of the 25 countries coming today, or virtually, Italy is actually not attending anymore because they fear that what France and the UK are suggesting is a bit too much than they could actually, live up to. So Giorgia Meloni has actually pulled out last minute. So the question is, how do you keep European unity, keep Ukraine secure, and keep Donald Trump aside? I mean, it's something of an impossible trio of things to try to kind of work towards.
Yeah, a delicate balancing act, and still we don't have a lot of information, do we? There's still a lot we don't know. Take us on to The Eye as well, which has a different angle on this, Zoe. And as with The Eye's front pages, they're very dramatic and they have these bullet points, but we don't have a huge amount of detail. But talk us through what they're saying on their front page.
So there is a team in the US that finds Ukrainian children that have been seized by Russia. This is, I would say, a rather underreported part of the Ukrainian war, but obviously an incredibly serious and tragic part. So there have been 19,500 reports of children being abducted since the war began. Some of them discovered on adoption agency websites in Russia, or living with Russian families. Now, there is a team in the US that was helping to find these children. However, now, with Elon Musk's cost-cutting drive under the Doge department in the US, the funding for this particular scheme has been slashed. And obviously there is now a concern, what does that mean for these Ukrainian children? Will they come home? But also another example of how these cuts to efficiency spending in the US, they might be popular with the public, but when you actually drill down into what this means, it's quite easy to see how quickly this will lose support, because this, I think everyone would agree, this is a very worthy foreign aid public campaign, and it looks like it's going to have its funding removed.
Yeah.
Well, I actually wonder if everyone would agree on that. I feel like the UK and the US, public opinion-wise, it's actually in quite different places on Ukraine. I mean, look at the way that Americans reacted to the advanced Trump showdown with Zelensky, and actually a lot of Republican voters, a lot of people who voted for Trump, thought he did the right thing. In a split that doesn't exist in the UK, because pretty much everyone in the UK thinks what happened there was totally outrageous, and this is a kind of a cut and dry case of a good cause.
Yeah,
but actually,
they
the
see
US
their money
is
going
so
to a country that they feel
absolutely could not point it out on a map. And actually, what I found fascinating is the public opinion of the right wing in the US is so completely, there's such a big gap between the UK public opinion and European public opinion in general, that actually for people like this, some people who voted for Trump might think, great, why are our tax dollars going here?
Interesting. Take us back to this country now, and what's going on with the forthcoming spring statement. Lots of speculation around about what Rachel Reeves' next step might be, and certainly welfare under the spotlight, and that's the front page of The Times. What are they telling us?
Yeah, it feels like we're always either talking about the spring statement or the budget, aren't we? It's always the run-up to either. But yes, we do have the spring statement very much on the horizon now. And of course, the big conversation last week domestically was this briefing that Labour was ready to slash disability benefits, which of course has caused a huge split in the Labour Party and in Keir Starmer's own cabinet, because originally this was framed as getting the welfare, particularly the sickness and disability benefit costs down, not only to help government find public savings, but also to push people back into work. They say there are far too many people who are not in work, who could work. However...
And want to work, they say.
And want to work. However, the point is now that not only is this going to be £5 billion of cuts to probably the most vulnerable and sickest people in UK society, but also this is going to be cuts to the personal independent payments, which are disability benefits that help people actually, in many cases, find work. They give people the equipment needed or the resources needed to be able to go about their daily life. So there are concerns about not only how this is going to go down with vulnerable constituents, but also whether this will actually achieve the very thing that Labour is set out to do, which is helping people find work.
And all the articles, obviously we don't have the details yet of what this will actually mean for people. And there'll be lots of people watching really concerned because... they don't know yet what's going to happen to their benefits. But a lot of governments have tried to cut the welfare bill before, haven't they? And already there seems to be pushback from backbench MPs and even cabinet members, as you were reflecting. I mean, how successful do you think a push like this can be?
Well, they have actually had remarkable tolerance from the Labour Party in Parliament in terms of some of the more controversial stuff that they've done. At The Spectator, we have actually just recorded a podcast going out later today called Is Keir Starmer a Tory? Because if you look at the things that he's done, cutting winter fuel allowance, keeping the two-child benefit cap, slashing foreign aid, slashing NHS bureaucracy this week as well, and now this welfare cut that's coming down the line, which might cut the budget by about half of what it currently is. These are things that the Tories have always dreamt of. And I think that the Labour Party has had so much tolerance for Keir Starmer because of his massive majority, because he's still in a honeymoon phase at the moment. But I do wonder if this is not going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because it does seem like, for now, for the first time at least, the Cabinet are starting to also oppose this.
Yeah, and the Financial Times reflects the fact that it's not just the welfare budget cuts that are ruffling feathers, but there are lots of departments that are concerned about where the axe will fall.
I mean, all of them are going to be concerned about whether they're going to be able to keep the money within their department needed to enact their policy agendas. There's concerns about justice, particularly courts, backlogs. There's obviously concerns about education as well. You know, all these pledges that Labour have made, and the fact that Labour was elected on a mandate of improving public services, improving the NHS, I think there is going to be a real concern amongst cabinet ministers that there's this fight for funding at a time where, you know, the government is incredibly obsessed with fiscal responsibility. Cuts are across the board. They've ruled out raising taxes or breaking their fiscal rules. I think you're going to see a real bun fight over funding, and it's not going to be pretty because, yes, we have the welfare cuts, which are going to ruffle feathers across because this is vulnerable constituents, but you also have specific departments as well.
And Rachel Reeves will say what can I do? It's the inheritance I got from the Tories. We're out of time, but you'll be back again next hour, so see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are under